The Altamaha River winds quietly through Georgia's coastal lowlands. Fishermen and locals have long whispered of something that moves beneath the surface. Not a splash, not a ripple, but something deliberate, large, and dark. Too big to be any ordinary river creature. People ask why there's no proof, why cameras never catch it. But those who've seen it say you don't reach for your phone when the river feels aware. Because locals don't call it a monster. They call it something that lives there. Welcome to the Cryptid Files, where we investigate mysterious creatures reported across the United States. I'm your host, Cupcake. Today, we're in Georgia, exploring the Altamaha-ha, a cryptid said to haunt the Altamaha River. From early 20th century sightings to modern reports, we'll look at the evidence, the witness accounts, and the theories surrounding this elusive river creature. The Altamaha River winds across Georgia's coastal lowlands, carving a path through swamps, cypress stands, and marshes. It's not a river that announces itself. It moves slow, deep, and heavy, dark water flowing over hidden stumps and tangled roots. From above, it looks like a ribbon of shadow cutting through the landscape. Up close, it's a labyrinth. Channels split and rejoin. Mudbanks rise and fall with the tide. Every bend, every curve creates a place where the eye can be fooled, where the unknown can hide. This part of Georgia is what locals call Blackwater Country. The water is a tea color from the tannins leaching from the swamp trees. Low visibility makes even a small ripple look like something moving beneath the surface. Logs and stumps drift silently, carried by the current. Shadows form shapes that can fool even the most experienced fishermen. On still nights, the river's reflection is perfect, making it impossible to tell what is water and what is something else. Humans have lived along the Altamaha for centuries. Indigenous peoples navigated its channels carefully, naming places and marking hazards. Settlers later fished and hunted along its banks. Stories of strange river creatures predate modern cameras and cell phones. Some describe long, serpentine forms moving just beneath the water. Others tell of shapes that appear, linger, and vanish as silently as they came. Even today, locals speak quietly of the Altamaha-ha, warning outsiders that curiosity can be dangerous. Not just because of the river's hidden channels, but because the river seems aware. By now, the river has been introduced as more than water. It's a living, shifting environment. It's a stage where every reported encounter of the Altamaha-ha takes place. From here, we move to the earliest recorded sightings to see what those who ventured too close have reported. With the river set, we can now look at the first accounts of the Altamaha-ha's reports that go back over a century. By the early 1900s, the Altamaha River was already familiar to the people who worked it every day. Fishermen knew its bends. Settlers knew where the current pulled hardest. They knew what normal looked like. And then they started noticing movement that didn't fit. Not splashing, not thrashing, but something gliding. Accounts from local fishermen and early settlers describe a presence beneath the surface. Long, serpentine, and unnervingly smooth. The body was said to stretch far beyond what any known river animal could account for, its dark skin barely visible as it shifted through the murky water. And what unsettled witnesses most wasn't just its size, but how it moved. Deliberate, controlled, as if it understood the river better than the people who lived on it. There was no panic in its motion, no sudden burst of speed. It didn't flee when boats passed overhead. It simply adjusted, sliding with the current, then against it, as though choosing where to go rather than being carried there. One of the most often reported descriptions comes from the 1920s. In the 1920s, a pair of fishermen rowing near a bend in the river described a shape as wide as a canoe, gliding under the water like it knew the current. They didn't claim it surfaced. They didn't claim it attacked. They just said it passed beneath them, slow, silent, and impossibly large, leaving behind a ripple that lingered longer than it should have. After that, stories like this became harder to dismiss because they kept coming from people who knew the river best. From the 1940s through the 1960s, the reports didn't stop. They multiplied. More locals began coming forward. People who lived near the river, crossed it daily, or worked its waters for decades. These weren't dramatic encounters. There were no attacks, no clear photographs, just moments that left people unsettled long after they were over. Small boats were sometimes nudged, not struck, not capsized, just enough to be noticed. A gentle push against the hull, a slow shift in the water that couldn't be blamed on the wind or current. Other times, ripples would spread outward in smooth, deliberate rings, forming around something no one could see. Patterns started to emerge. Sightings were reported most often near river bends, where the water deepens and visibility drops. Bridges became another focal point, places where people paused, lingered, and looked down into the river for just a little too long. And then there was the feeling. Again and again, witnesses described the same sensation. Being watched. Not from above, not from the shore, but from beneath the surface. An unseen presence moving slowly below. Aware of them, tracking them without ever revealing itself. One account from this period captures that unease perfectly. A woman walking along the riverbank saw a dark form, long and thin, break the water just far enough to disappear again. She described it as an unsettling awareness. She couldn't say how she knew, only that whatever she saw wasn't passing through by accident. It had noticed her, and then it was gone. By the time these stories had accumulated over decades, something else became impossible to ignore. Patterns began to form. Not enough to prove anything outright, but enough to suggest that these encounters weren't random. When locals compared notes, similarities surfaced again and again. Many sightings happened during the summer months, when the river sat heavy under the heat and fog rolled in low after sunset. Visibility dropped. Sounds carried strangely. The water felt thicker somehow, slower, darker, less forgiving. Night seemed to matter. So did where people were standing. Encounters clustered near river bends, where the Altamaha curves sharply and the depth increases without warning. Deep channels and narrow inlets showed up repeatedly in reports, as if whatever was moving through the river preferred places where it could remain unseen. Bridges became observation points, not because the thing lingered there, but because people did. And what they described wasn't chaos. The behavior reported was mostly controlled, gliding, smooth, steady movement beneath the surface, creating long wakes without visible bodies. Witnesses often said that the water moved as though something large displaced it slowly, intentionally, but not always. Every so often, the stillness broke. Sudden splashes, a sharp disturbance, river erupting briefly before settling again, leaving behind nothing concrete to point to. No animal surfaced, no debris fouled, just silence and questions. One fisherman reported a wake long enough to almost capsize his small skiff, but when he looked, there was nothing there. Just water. No dorsal fin, no tail, no explanation. Just the aftermath of something that had passed through. Stories like this don't offer proof, but they offer consistency. The same times of year, the same stretches of water, the same uneasy feeling that whatever was responsible wasn't acting on instinct alone. That's what made these accounts difficult to dismiss. Individually, each story can be explained away. A log, a fish, a trick of the current, but taken together, spread across decades, told by people who didn't know each other, the repetition begins to matter. Still, no one claims certainty. There were no declarations of monsters, no clear conclusions, just an understanding, quietly shared among those who knew the river best, that something moved through it, something that followed familiar routes, appeared under familiar conditions, and left just enough evidence behind to be noticed, but never enough to be understood. And that uncertainty, that refusal to fully reveal itself, is what kept the mystery alive. Because whatever it was, it never stayed long enough to be named with confidence, only long enough to be remembered. By the mid-20th century, the Altamaha-ha was no longer just a handful of strange encounters whispered along the riverbanks. Decades of consistent reports had shaped it into something else entirely. A river legend, persistent and unresolved. The descriptions have changed very little over time. The same long movement beneath the surface, the same dark shape, never fully seen, the same deliberate glide through the water that locals knew well enough to recognize when something didn't belong. Generation after generation, people told similar stories without ever trying to make them grander than they were. That consistency is what allowed the legend to survive. It wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on repetition. As the decades passed, sightings didn't stop. They became more frequent, more detailed, and for the first time, entered newspapers and local lore. What had once been personal experiences, shared cautiously, if at all, started appearing in print. The river's secrets were no longer confined to those who lived beside it. And with that shift came something new. Names, timelines, public attention. The Altamaha-ha was no longer just something in the water. It had become a story people recognized. A presence tied to a specific place, resurfacing again and again despite modern explanations and advancing technology. And as the river moved forward into the modern era, so did the sightings. Because whatever has been moving through the Altamaha for generations didn't disappear with time. It was just getting noticed. By the 1980s and 1990s, the Altamaha River was no longer an isolated place known only to locals. Recreational fishing increased. Kayaks appeared on stretches of water once traveled only by workboats. More people were watching the river than ever before, and the sightings continued. This time, the witnesses just weren't longtime fishermen. They included kayakers, boaters, and residents who lived along the banks. People familiar with wildlife, currents, and the difference between normal river behavior and something that wasn't. What stood out in these reports was a shift in movement. Early accounts often described slow, controlled gliding beneath the surface. But in some of these modern sightings, witnesses reported something more sudden, more forceful, not attacking, but assertive, as if the river itself had been disturbed. Witnesses also began offering more detailed estimates of size, not vague impressions, but length, width, and shape. Again and again, the same description surfaced: a long, serpentine body, dark in color, moving with purpose rather than panic. One of the most frequently cited accounts from this era comes from 1987. In 1987, a kayaker near a river bend reported a dark form, at least 15 feet long, surfacing briefly before vanishing. The wake it left rocked the kayak, yet no one else was nearby. There was no boat traffic, no sudden change in weather, no visible animal when the water settled. Just the lingering movement of something large slipping back beneath the surface. Other reports followed similar patterns. Fishermen described abrupt disturbances near deep channels, water bulging upward before collapsing inward again. Residents walking along the riverbank spoke of shapes moving just out of view, close enough to feel intentional. Between these accounts, one detail remains unchanged. Even though these reports came from decades after the first, the descriptions remained eerily consistent. Something was still moving beneath the water, unseen, unconfirmed, but undeniably present. No one claimed it stayed long. No one claimed it wanted to be seen. Only that, for brief moments, the water revealed something just enough to remind people that it wasn't empty. And once again, the water returned to normal, leaving witnesses with nothing but memory and the unsettling realization that whatever had been there had chosen to leave. In more recent years, the reports haven't faded. They've refined themselves. Modern sightings of the Altamaha-ha tend to share familiar traits, but with sharper detail, possibly because more people now carry cameras, GPS, and a better understanding of what should be in the river. Once again, location matters. Encounters continue to cluster near river bends, shallow channels, and areas clustered with submerged logs. Places where the river shape changes abruptly, where the water hides depth beneath an ordinary surface. Witnesses often mention these features, not because they explain what happened, but because they emphasize how closely the sightings follow the river's natural contours. Weather plays a role too. Many modern reports occur during foggy nights or periods of still weather, when the river goes quiet and sound travels further than expected. In these moments, even small disturbances stand out, and larger ones become impossible to ignore. What has changed most in modern accounts isn't what people see, it's what they feel. Again and again, witnesses describe a sense of awareness, not aggression, not curiosity, but watchfulness, as if whatever is moving through the water knows it's being observed, and it's choosing how much of itself to reveal. People talk about pauses in movement, subtle adjustments beneath the surface, water parting and rejoining without chaos, as though something passed through carefully rather than forcefully. One fisherman's description captures this unsettling restraint. One fisherman described a wake that spanned almost 20 feet, with the water folding around an unseen object. Moments later, the river was still. No splash, no disturbance. Just the feeling that something had been there. No animal surfaced, no debris fouled. No explanation presented itself. And yet, witnesses consistently emphasized the same detail. The river didn't behave as it should have. In these modern reports, new elements begin to surface. Not enough to solve the mystery, but enough to deepen it. People describe longer wakes, more defined movement, a sense of intent that feels difficult to dismiss in the age of drones, sonar, and constant surveillance. Despite this, the Altamaha-ha remains undocumented. No clear footage, no physical evidence, no definitive identification. Only accounts carefully told, often reluctantly shared, by people who know the river well enough to recognize when something doesn't belong. That's what keeps this mystery intact. The consistency across decades suggests continuity. The subtle changes suggest adaptation. And together, they point to a presence that hasn't disappeared, only learned how to remain unseen. Because even now, after all this time, the Altamaha River still offers the same quiet reminder. Something moves through it, and it doesn't seem interested in being found. As sightings continued into the modern era, the Altamaha-ha stopped living only in whispers. Reports began appearing in local newspapers, brief mentions tucked between fishing updates and community notices. Letters to editors described strange disturbances on the river. Oral interviews collected by regional historians and folklorists captured accounts that people had carried quietly for years before finally deciding to speak. The story was no longer confined to memory. It had entered the record. And yet, something strange happened as attention increased. Technology improved, cameras became smaller, faster, clearer, video became easier to capture, more people were present on the lake than ever before, fishing, kayaking, filming. But conclusive evidence never followed. Photographs were taken too late or from too far away. Videos showed ripples without a source, shadows without context, shapes that dissolved the moment they were examined closely. In some cases, witnesses said their cameras failed altogether, batteries draining unexpectedly, recordings cutting out, images blurring beyond usefulness. Not because something dramatic occurred on screen, but because whatever had been there was already gone. One reflection from this period sums up the frustration shared by many witnesses. Despite better lighting, better cameras, and more attention, the Altamaha-ha remained elusive. Every attempt at proof ended the same way. One moment it was there, the next, gone without a trace. The result was a strange contradiction. More documentation than ever before, and still nothing definitive. No single image could stand on its own. No recording settled the question. Instead, the mystery deepened, supported not by one undeniable moment, but by dozens of near misses that all ended the same way. Abruptly, quietly, unresolved. And that unresolved nature is what led to the most compelling accounts of all. Because when evidence fails, all that remains are the people who were there, standing on riverbanks, sitting in boats, feeling the water change beneath them. In the next section, we step away from summaries and secondhand reports and into the voices of who encountered something firsthand, long enough to know it was real, but never long enough to prove it. Even with detailed modern sightings, not everyone believes the Altamaha-ha is something unknown. Skeptics point to misidentifications, exaggeration, or natural phenomena. But do those explanations really fit the encounters? Let's see what science and local experts have to say. Some researchers believe the Altamaha-ha doesn't require an unknown creature to explain every sighting, only a closer look at the river itself. The Altamaha River is home to giant Atlantic sturgeon, ancient fish that can grow over 10 feet long. Their bodies are long and smooth, armored rather than scaled, and when they surface, they do so without warning. In low light, a sturgeon breaking the water could appear serpentine, even unnatural, especially to those unfamiliar with what they are seeing. Alligators are another possibility. Large specimens often remain hidden in the river bends and back channels, barely visible beneath the surface. When they move, only a portion of their body may be seen, creating the illusion of a much larger creature gliding silently through the water. Then there's the river itself. Submerged logs and debris are constantly shifting with the current. A partially sunken log can rise, roll, and disappear again, mimicking deliberate movement. Combined with fog, moonlight, and rippling water, these natural events can deceive the eye. A floating log or a partially submerged sturgeon could explain some sightings. Shadows stretch across the water. Waves distort size and distance. And at night, when reference points disappear, the familiar can become strange. But explanations like these don't answer everything. Because not all encounters happen in darkness, and not all witnesses describe the same thing. While sturgeon, alligator, and floating logs might occur for some reports, they don't explain everything. Many witnesses describe the creatures as being far larger than any known river animal, longer than a boat, wider than an alligator, and moving in a way that doesn't match the erratic motion of debris or the surfacing behavior of a fish. The movement is often described as smooth, controlled, deliberate. What's more difficult is to dismiss the consistency. Independent witnesses, sometimes decades apart, describe seeing the same thing in the same stretches of the river. Long, dark shapes, slow, purposeful motion, a presence that lingers rather than drifts away with the current. Some encounters happen in daylight, others at close range. In several cases, witnesses were familiar with the river. Fishermen, boaters, locals who had spent years around sturgeon and alligators. Yet they still insisted this is something different. And then there's the detail that appears again and again in these accounts. The feeling of being watched. Not startled, not surprised, but observed. Logs don't watch. Fish don't follow boats. And animals don't usually maintain distance while matching speed. But multiple witnesses describe something pacing them, submerged just beneath the surface, aware of their presence. That sense of intention is difficult to measure. It isn't scientific. It doesn't photograph well. But it's there in the testimony. And when enough people describe the same unease in the same place, under different conditions, it raises a question that science alone hasn't answered yet. Maybe some sightings are misidentifications, but maybe not all of them are. Skeptics have always been part of the story. From the earliest accounts, some locals dismissed reports of the Altamaha-ha as superstition, exaggeration, or misread shadows on a slow-moving river. Stories passed down through families were sometimes waved off as cautionary tales, meant to keep children close to shore or explain things that didn't have an easy answer. But not everyone denied it outright. Others accepted that something unusual existed in the river, even if they couldn't name it or prove it. They didn't call it a monster. They didn't claim certainty. They simply acknowledged that the Altamaha had a way of producing encounters that don't sit right. Moments that resisted simple explanation. The river was respected, watched carefully, spoken about in lowered voices. Skepticism didn't erase the Altamaha-ha. It lived alongside belief, questioned, debated, and retold. And whether dismissed or taken seriously, its presence persisted, not just in folklore, but in first-hand accounts that refused to fade. Rational explanations can account for some sightings, but they don't explain the most compelling accounts. Because some encounters go beyond shapes in the water or movement at distance. They happen up close. They linger, and the people who experience them don't describe confusion. They describe certainty. Next, we'll move into those moments. The detailed encounters, the first-hand stories, the nights on the river when something stayed just beneath the surface and refused to be ignored. Skeptical explanations can account for some sightings, but they fall short when confronted with the most detailed encounters. There are other moments when the river feels alive, when witnesses come face to face with something that refuses explanation. He had been fishing the Altamaha for most of his life. The morning was calm, early enough that the river was still waking up. Fog drifted low over the bends, thick in some places, thinning in others, revealing patches of dark water that reflected the pale sky above. He was alone in a small skiff, letting the current carry him slowly downstream. That's when he noticed the shadow. At first, it didn't alarm him. The river is full of debris, submerged logs, branches, things carried down from miles upstream. He assumed that's what it was. A long shape beneath the surface, barely visible through the fog-softened light. Then it moved. Not drifting, not rolling with the current. It moved deliberately. The shadow shifted direction, gliding beneath the water with a smoothness that he couldn't explain. As it passed under his boat, the skiff rocked gently. Not from waves, but from displacement. The water rose and fell in a way that felt controlled, as if something large had adjusted its depth beneath him. He froze. He didn't see fins. He didn't see scales. Only the outline of something long and dark, stretching further than he had expected. Longer than any alligator he'd ever seen in that stretch of the river. And then there was the feeling. He later said it wasn't fear at first. It was awareness. A sensation that he was no longer alone. That whatever was beneath him knew he was there. Not circling. Not attacking. Watching. The shadow slid past the boat and toward the deeper bend ahead. Within seconds, it was gone, absorbed by darker water, swallowed by fog and reflection. No splash. No disturbance left behind. Even in broad daylight, the shape remained elusive. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. The fisherman waited. He listened. He scanned the water for any sign of what he'd seen. There was nothing. No explanation fit cleanly. Not a log, not a fish, not anything he could name. He finished the morning in silence and never forgot the feeling that, for a moment, the river had been aware of him. Encounter number 2. He went out late, long after the last motorboats had cleared the river. The Altamaha was quiet in a way that only happens at night. The surface looked calm, almost flat, broken only by a steady rhythm of his paddle dipping into the water. He stayed close to a shallow bend he knew well. Slow current, narrow channel, familiar territory. At first, nothing felt unusual. Then the water beside him surged. Not a splash, not a wave. A sudden push of motion, fast and heavy, and close enough that the kayak tilted slightly toward it. He instinctively braced, expecting something to break the surface. Nothing did. The dark form moved alongside the kayak, matching his pace for several seconds. Faster than the current, too controlled to be debris. The wake brushed against the hull, rolling past him in a low, smooth swell that didn't behave like normal river movement. He stopped paddling. The form didn't drift away. It stayed with him. Beneath the surface, the water seemed to shift as if something immense was changing direction, adjusting its depth. He couldn't see a shape clearly, only a darker mass moving through darker water, outlined briefly by moonlight before disappearing again. That's when the river began to feel wrong. He later struggled to describe it. The air felt heavier, the quiet felt deliberate. Each paddle stroke felt noticed, measured, as though whatever was beneath him was aware of his movement and responding to it. Patient, unhurried. He didn't panic, not at first anyway, but he did turn toward shore, paddling carefully, trying not to splash or draw attention. The movement followed for a short distance longer before veering away toward deeper water. No sound, no surface break, no explanation. Once he reached the shore, he waited, listening for anything that might confirm what he'd just experienced. The river returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened. Later, when he described the encounter, he said the most unsettling part wasn't the size or the speed. It was the awareness. Multiple independent witnesses described some unnerving sensation. That feeling that whatever moves beneath the Altamaha is conscious of those who cross its waters. And that, more than anything else, is what makes these encounters difficult to dismiss. The third encounter. They hadn't gone looking for anything unusual. It was a small group of local teenagers, camping near a familiar bend in the river, just after dark. The light was fading, the fire low, the river moving quietly beyond the tree line. It was the kind of night where sound carried further than expected. Water against the bank, insects in the brush, something moving occasionally just out of sight. At first, the river looked normal. Then the water shifted. Not from the wind, not from the current. A shadow broke the surface just long enough to register as something solid. Smooth, dark. Its body rose without splashing, the water seeming to move around it rather than against it. One of them said later that the river appeared to part, sliding past the shape as if it knew where it was going. It didn't thrash. It didn't struggle. It moved with a precision none of them could explain. They froze. Someone whispered that it was an alligator, but the shape didn't match. No ridged back, no sudden snap of movement. And when it disappeared, it didn't sink or roll away. It slipped back beneath the surface as if it had never been there at all. The entire encounter lasted only seconds. But when it was gone, the air felt different. They described a sudden heavy smell, damp mud, decaying leaves, river rot rising sharply from the bank. The fire crackled. The insects went quiet. No one spoke for a long moment. Each of them had seen it. Not from different angles, not with different interpretations. The same shape, the same movement. Later, when they talked about it, they all agreed on one thing. What they saw could not be explained by a floating log or a fish passing through shallow water. Its movements were deliberate, almost intelligent. And long after the river returned to normal, they couldn't shake the feeling that whatever surfaced that night had known where they were, had chosen to reveal itself briefly and disappear. When these encounters are placed side by side, a pattern begins to emerge. Across decades, spanning from the 1980s, the early 2000s, and into the mid-2010s, witnesses describe the same core features. Different people, different conditions, the same details. Again and again, the body is described as smooth and elongated, not ridged, not segmented, long enough to stretch beneath boats or rise briefly from the water without revealing its full length. Estimations vary, but most place it somewhere between 10 and over 20 feet, longer than a typical alligator, and longer than any fish commonly seen in the river. The movement is perhaps the most consistent element. Witnesses don't describe thrashing or erratic motion. They describe gliding, controlled shifts in directions, changes in depths that feel intentional rather than reactive. The creature doesn't move with the current, it moves independently of it. And then there's the awareness. Across all three encounters, witnesses describe the same sensation. The feeling of being noticed. Not startled, not chased, but observed. Whether drifting in a skiff, paddling alone at night, or sitting near the bank with others nearby, the presence beneath the water seems aware of human activity and responsive to it. Location matters too. Sightings tend to occur near river bends, deep channels, and inlets, places where visibility is limited and the river changes behavior. These are natural concealment zones, where depth increases suddenly and currents shift without warning. None of these events prove the existence of a single creature. But taken together, they complicate simple explanations. Across decades, reports show the same characteristics. Even as eyewitnesses change, the description remains remarkably consistent. A persistent mystery lurking beneath the waters of the Altamaha River. And whatever it is, it hasn't left. These encounters leave more questions than answers. Science can speculate. Skeptics can propose explanations. But the people who live along the Altamaha River continue to tell these stories, passing them down through families, through whispered warnings, through shared memory. They respect the river. They respect what may lurk beneath it. And above all, they honor the mystery that endures, one that has persisted for generations, long before cameras and modern reports, and continues to capture the imagination today. In this part of Georgia, the river is more than water. Elders warn children not to wander too close to certain bends, especially after dark. The stories aren't told to frighten. They're lessons passed quietly, reminders to respect the river and the life it harbors. Sometimes a story will drift from one family to another, changing with each telling, yet always carrying the same caution. The river is alive in ways people cannot fully understand. The Altamaha-ha is often at the center of these tales. Not a monster in a way movies portray them, but a presence. Smooth, elusive, and powerful. Witnesses say it moves through the water as if the river itself bends to accommodate it, gliding past obstacles without effort, aware of anyone who enters its path. These stories paint the river as more than a physical space. It becomes a boundary, a keeper of secrets, a place where humans are reminded that the unknown still exists. And the Altamaha-ha, woven into the oral history, is its most elusive inhabitant, a living mystery in the minds and memories of those who call this place home. For those who live along the Altamaha, the river is more than a place to fish or boat. It carries history, sustains life, and holds secrets few outsiders will ever witness. And woven into that tapestry of water and land is the Altamaha-ha. The legend inspires a quiet pride. Locals take care on certain bends, watch the river closely, and share stories that remind each other of what lies beneath. It's not feared. They respect the creature, and by extension, the river itself. In a way, knowing the stories, passing them along, becomes part of living here. It shapes daily routines, how visitors approach the water, how children play near the banks, and even how anglers read the currents. For the people of this region, the Altamaha-ha is not a tale. It's a presence. A reminder that some things in nature cannot be fully understood, that some mysteries demand respect, and that those who share the river with it are part of a story that stretches across generations. Even with the modern cameras, clearer lighting, and decades of scientific study, the Altamaha-ha continues to evade detection. Reports don't stop. Sightings persist. And with each new account, the river seems to keep its secret a little longer. The mystery itself has become part of the cultural fabric. It's in the stories shared quietly along the banks, the warnings passed from one generation to the next, and the respect people carry for the water and what might dwell beneath it. Some days, a shadow under a skiff. Other nights, it's a subtle shift of current on a quiet bend, a sensation that something watches from below. For those who live here, or even those who visit, the Altamaha-ha is more than a cryptid. It is a reminder. Some things in nature cannot be fully explained. Some encounters leave questions instead of answers, and those questions are preserved in stories, in memory, and in the fleeting moments when the river reveals a hint of its secret inhabitant. Even with all this scrutiny and technology, the Altamaha-ha endures. It lives in the river's depths, in the imagination of those who share its waters, and in the collective wonder that keeps its legend alive. These encounters, these stories, remind us that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be respected. The Altamaha-ha remains one of Georgia's most enduring river legends, woven into the waters, the banks, and the lives of those who call this region home. It is a presence that lingers in memory, in cautionary tale, in the quiet moments when the river seems just a little too alive. The Altamaha-ha isn't just a river cryptid. It's a reminder of how much we still don't understand about the world around us. From early 20th century reports to modern encounters, it has remained elusive, consistent, and enigmatic. Its presence is felt more than it is seen, gliding beneath the water, shaping stories, influencing local folklore, and guiding the way those who live around the water approach it. It's a living mystery, threaded into the fabric of the Altamaha River, a testament to the unknown that still exists in our everyday world. The Altamaha-ha is just one chapter in our ongoing exploration of America's hidden mysteries. Across states, rivers, forests, and small towns, stories like this persist, passed quietly from generation to generation, whispered in families, remembered in local lore, and occasionally glimpsed by those who venture too close. They remind us that some creatures, like some truths, exist just beyond the edge of sight. As we continue our A through Z journey, traveling state by state, cryptid by cryptid, we'll encounter more of these enduring mysteries, each one unique, each one elusive, and each one a reflection of the stories communities keep close to their hearts. If you've seen or heard something strange along the rivers, swamps, or woods, we would love to hear from you. All submissions will remain anonymous. You can reach us at hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. Your encounters help keep these legends alive and keep us asking the same question: what really lurks out there in the dark waters? Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.